Good afternoon, students, and welcome back to Mr. Lohan's AP European History class. How are you guys doing today? Well, good. I'm glad I asked that question, just like in class. Well, today, guys, we're going to be on essential question 12.4. This whole chapter has been trying to tackle what does it mean to be conservative or liberal or nationalist in the 19th century. And we've talked about nationalism. We've talked about liberalism. And today we're going to talk about, you guessed it, conservatism, all right? So what we're going to try to find out today is what methods did conservative use to control or keep control of Europe? So pause if you need to, and let's dive into these notes. All right, conservative restoration in Europe. So what you're going to see in this chapter is, after Napoleon, Europeans, conservative European monarchs, are largely able to restore the governments that existed before Napoleon. They're going to bring back these monarchs and bring back this conservative leadership. But like I said, we're going to learn about how did they do that? What methods did they use to do that? And we're going to start off in Austria and Germany. We've talked about Germany and Austria so many times, guys. The old Holy Roman Empire that was divided by, 1,000 states with different rulers, different princes, different nobles, and, it's just a big mess, right? Well, you fast forward to now, and like I said, it's a little bit cleaner, but it's still pretty messy, all right? So, I'll click on here. There we go. All right. So, yeah, guys, it's still kind of messy. You can kind of see this is the German states or the Holy Roman Empire or, the Habsburg Empire, whatever you want to call it. The Holy Roman Empire kind of falls apart after Napoleon. But look at all of these groups, right? Croats, Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Italians, Romanians, Ukrainians, all of these guys living in the same area. And one of the biggest threats, guys, to the Habsburg Empire is nationalism. Because in some way, at some point, everybody is going to want their own nation. And as you guys saw on that map exercise that we did in class, you're going to see between 1815 and 1914, Europe is going to change drastically. Why? Well, there's going to be all of these revolutions. And a lot of the revolutions, guys, are going to happen right here in this picture on this map. Now, one of the biggest things is a lot of these states start to look around and they start thinking, we all speak German, we're all Protestant. We all have these similar ideas of culture, whether they really did or not. All right. They invented a lot of it when they become a nation, but they start to think, what if we united into a united German-speaking nation? Now, that is, guys, one of the biggest threats to the nobles in power because still in a lot of these places, a lot of noble princes still rule some of these states, and a united Germany would means they would be kicked out of power and they would have to submit to the rule of whoever is going to be the ruler of this new German state. So this nationalism, this idea of a unified Germany is a big threat to the Habsburg Empire. Pause if you need to. So let's talk about this Habsburg Empire. Once again, here's a different way of looking at the map. So, now I'll be honest with you guys. Most Austrians thought of themselves not as we are a German state, but they most thought of themselves like Europeans had thought of themselves for centuries. You associated with maybe your religion, or I'm Catholic, or I'm Protestant, I'm Lutheran, I'm Calvinist, whatever. Or you thought of yourself as the region you kind of grew up in. Remember, guys, we talked about in the 1700s, how did a peasant identify? Well, they identified by their family. Maybe they identified by their village. Maybe they identified by the noble that owned their land. But it wasn't until, if you were a peasant in France, it wasn't really until after the French Revolution that you had this idea that we're all French people. No, you're all from the area that you came from. And the area that you came from, even though you speak the same language, is different from those guys over there 3 miles away, right? So most Austrians still thought of themselves in this way. But like I told you, there are some people within the empire that wanted to be their own nation. Not everybody that lives in the Habsburg Empire identifies with Austrian. For instance, if you're a Hungarian, that's a different language, different culture, different religiously. And you don't identify with these Austrians that rule over you. If you're Slovak, Same thing. You speak a different language. You have a different culture. Italian, same thing. Ukrainian, Serb. Guys, the Habsburg Empire is a mashed mess of different groups of people. And they all have their own languages, and they all have their own cultures, but they're all being ruled by these German-speaking Austrians that they can't relate to. This is why, guys, the Habsburg Empire is a recipe for disaster, and it is going to be the center of many of these revolutions and many of these wars that are going to happen in the next 100 years. Now, here's the thing. Remember we talked about how Metternich, the leader of the Congress of Vienna, Metternich is kind of the prime minister of Austria. He's kind of the guy in charge. And if Metternich gives in and says, okay, you over here, the Hungarians, you guys can be a nation, well, then everybody would want to be a nation, right? If you let one person do it, you got to let everybody. So if he gives in even a little bit, the empire's going to fall apart. Yet at the same time, all of these guys are pushing for this idea of this nation, right? This imagined community that we talked about, right? On the other hand, if Germany united, then Austria, also German-speaking people, would just get sucked into it. Who would unite Germany? Well, guys, Prussia is the most powerful state in the area, and if they decided that they were just going to go conquer all the German states, you, Austria, the Habsburgs, couldn't stop them. And then you would get sucked into this new German state, and the Austrian Empire would be no more. So do you see kind of the serious situation that the Habsburgs were in, right? Now, guys, all of this thing was called the German Confederation, okay? So after Napoleon was defeated at the Congress of Vienna, the German states were organized into this thing called the German Confederation. Basically, instead of the big mess that it was, 39 German states are going to be united under Austrian leadership. But like I said, Prussia's a really powerful state. And if they decide that they're going to unite Germany, spoiler alert, that's what they're going to do, then Austria is going to be in some serious trouble. Now, ideally, in the German Confederation, under the rules of the Congress of Vienna, every state was supposed to be kind of independent, but with the understanding that Austria is going to kind of be in charge. And Austria's goal is to keep all of these different states under control and keep liberal ideas from sliding in to these states, because if liberal ideas start coming in and people start wanting to write constitutions, ooh, that's a threat to conservative leadership, right? So I hope you guys are seeing how these conservative forces and these liberal forces and these nationalist forces are slamming into each other, right? And like I said, guys, that is a recipe for revolution, and that's a recipe for war, and those are all going to happen in the next century. Pause if you need to. Okay, let's move into Prussia. We're still under the same topic of Austria and Germany, all right? Okay, now, Prussia. Well, guys, remember we talked about a few chapters back, the Hohenzollerns, right? These Prussian family dynasty, right? Like the Bourbon dynasty, the Louis in France. Well, guys, in Prussia, they have the Hohenzollerns, right? And those were the Fredericks and the Williams and the Frederick Williamses, right? So now we're on Frederick William III. So guys, when Napoleon was defeated, there was a lot of liberal ideas spreading through Prussia. Why? Because Napoleon spread the Napoleonic Code about everybody has natural rights, life, liberty, property, freedom of the press, yada, 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 write a constitution. And guys, when Prussia was kind of under French control, Frederick William III kind of promised liberal thinking people that he would write a constitution, right? After we are free from Napoleon, we will write a constitution. But he's free from Napoleon and kind of starts thinking, why would I want a constitution and why would I want to limit my own power over Prussia? That would be dumb for me. So guys, in 1817, after Napoleon was long gone out of Prussia, he changed his mind. And instead, he created what's called a Council of State. He created his own little government that he kind of controlled and made himself pretty much the ruler of Prussia. All right? So he controls the government. But what about other parts of the country? Well, In order to control, guys, the different provinces of Prussia, he created 8 Diets. You guys remember like the Diet of Worms where Martin Luther got hauled in front of the Diet? A Diet, guys, is a council, right? So he created these 8 councils, and guess who he put in charge of all of these 8 councils? The old Prussian Junkers, the nobles, the old Prussian nobles. So who's in charge of every one of these councils? Conservative people. Then, guys, he goes through the Prussian military, and anybody that was a liberal leader of the Prussian military, he takes out of power and he replaces them by conservatives. So when we think about, guys, what methods did conservatives use to keep Europe under control? Well, guys, they made sure that everybody in the government, everybody in the military was all conservative, and they didn't allow liberals to take part in government and in the military, at least in Prussia. So what we have to do, guys, we have to say, okay, well, what about other places? Did other places kind of behave like Prussia and do the same things? Or did they do something different? Well, pause if you need to, and let's find out. All right, guys, student nationalism. Now, we're still in the German states, guys. We know that places like Prussia, one German state, are getting rid of all liberal leaders and replacing them with conservatives. Well, what else is going on in the German states, and how else are they preventing liberal ideas and nationalist ideas from spreading? Because even though Prussia and the German states are pretty conservative, and even though they're trying to stamp all this stuff out, the Napoleonic Code brought new ideas into these German states. It's like this, guys. If you give a little kid chocolate for the first time when they're really young, their brain, guys, explodes. And it goes on overload because it's the most amazing thing they've ever had. And if you try to give them broccoli after the chocolate, they're going to be like, ew, gross, I never want to eat anything but chocolate again. That's kind of what the Napoleonic Code did to a lot of these places. Once you've tasted these ideas of liberty and natural rights, and somebody tries to say, no, nobility, hereditary rights, noble privilege, you're like, ew, gross, I want to go back to that chocolate. All right? Because that's delicious. So the Napoleonic Code, guys, had already been spread, and you can't get those ideas out of people's head. That rhymed. Anyway. Now, many university students, all right, so guys, obviously universities are hotbeds of liberal ideas. Well, there was a lot of university students in different German states that had this idea in their mind of a unified Germany and what we could do as a nation if we could unify. And guess what they did, guys? They started to form these student groups called Burschenschaften, all right? Do you have to remember Burschenschaften? I don't know, guys. Maybe. You might see it on an AP test. But just know, guys, that's a student group. And Burschenschaften should be yellow, not green, because it is a vocab word. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, these student groups called Burschenschaften. Now, what did these student groups do that was so dangerous? Well, guys, these student groups started to say things like, hey, Martin Luther was a German. We're all German. Let's celebrate Martin Luther because we're all German and he did a great German thing. Also, hey, remember when we kicked out the French? Let's all, as German people, celebrate that. So these Burschenschaften started to make these nationalist celebration. I mean, think about it, guys. Luther was a unifying figure, right? We're all Lutheran, we're all German, right? Even though there were some Germans that weren't Lutheran. But the idea is you're starting to unite under ideas of what it means to be German. And remember, guys, nationalism is a dangerous thing. Well, guys, all of this comes to a head when in 1819, a student of a Burschenschaften named Karl Sand assassinated a conservative intellectual. And boy, guys, were the conservative governments of Germany freaked out. Well, guys, this student that assassinated a conservative guy, Karl Sand, this student, well, guys, he gets tried and executed in public, as you can see from this picture here, right? Getting ready to get the business with the head being chopped off from the back. Now, Metternich, remember, guys, the guy in charge of Austria, Metternich used Karl Sand's assassination of a conservative leader as an excuse to pass what were called the Carlsbad Decrees. Now, remember, we're trying to think what methods, guys, did conservative use to keep power? Well, this is one of them, all right? What did the Carlsbad Decrees do? Well, they said from now on, Burschenschaften, these student groups, are not allowed to get together. They're banned from meeting. That's a very common tactic, guys, of conservative people. Banned people, well, not just conservative people, but the conservatives in the 19th century, banned people from meeting. If you ban people from meeting, they can't get together and discuss nationalist ideas. What else can you do? Censor the press. All right? You tell all these newspapers they can't write this stuff. You limit freedom of speech, right? And they forbade universities to discuss sensitive subjects. They said, from now on, you can't discuss things like nationalism in the university. But guys, I'll be honest with you, universities are the place that you're supposed to discuss sensitive subjects. So one of the main things, guys, that you're going to see conservative governments in the 19th century do is censor freedom of speech and forbid people from meeting together, because in that way, you can keep these uprisings from happening. Make sense? Pause if you need to. All right, now, let's talk about the British. Let's move over to the British. Now, the British are pretty liberal, guys. Think about it. They limited the power of their king way back in the English Civil War, right? They've had a parliament for a very long time. But even liberal Great Britain, guys, is still pretty conservative, at least for Great Britain in the 19th century. So, one of the things, guys, that always brings out the change is people that don't have money and food, right? Think about the French Revolution. Well, guys, between 1815 and 1817, Great Britain experienced some kind of hard times. Well, guys, number one, it was at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and there were bad harvests, and Great Britain was running low on food. But not only that, guys, all of these soldiers from Great Britain, they go to fight Napoleon in the war, and after the war's over, they don't have a job. So they come back. Well, now, guys, the job markets are all flooded. You've got too many people that need jobs and not enough jobs. So think about it. You've got a whole bunch of people that are unemployed and you don't have a lot of food. Guys, that is a recipe for some liberal ideas or nationalist ideas, right? So now the leader, guys, of Great Britain was this guy. One of the leaders, guys, was this guy named Lord Liverpool, all right? And Lord Liverpool did what he thought was best to fix the situation of bad harvests and things like that. And what he did was what governments had always do, protect the wealthy people. So guys, Lord Liverpool tried to protect wealthy landowners by passing this thing called the Corn Law in 1850. Now guys, corn is a grain, right? Now what the Corn Law did was it raised the tariff on grain. Now you might be like, okay, Lahan, I know you've said this word before. What is a tariff? Well, guys, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. All right? So, imports, guys, are goods that you buy from other countries, right? They are brought into your country. They're imported. So, think of it this way, guys. Let's say Great Britain is buying grain from, France, okay? Buying grain from France. So, French grain sellers are selling grain into Great Britain. Well, guys, what if you are a British grain grower? That means competition, right? And if you're trying to compete with the French, in order to get people to buy your grain, what might you do? You might lower the prices, right? Well, guys, what's going to happen if Great Britain raises the taxes on imported goods? Well, the French are going to be like, I don't want to pay those taxes. I'm not going to sell grain into Great Britain. And if the French aren't selling grain into Great Britain, then British grain growers have no competition. And guys, if you have no competition for your goods, what are you going to do to those prices? You're going to jack them up and try to milk the people for all you can get. Well, guys, bad situation, right? Because people are already starving. There's already not enough food. And the people that are growing the food have no competition, so they raise their prices. Boy, does that cause the people to go hungry and be really, really pissed off. Now, to top things off, in order to make money for losses in the government, Liverpool also passed a new sales tax. All right? You know, like you go to the store, guys, and there's a sales tax. Now, in truth, the wealthy and the poor had to pay it, guys, but the poor people didn't have the money to pay it with. So if you think about it, guys, Lord Liverpool has just made 2 slaps in the face to the poor of the British. All right? So, what are the poor people going to do, guys? start rising up and calling for change. Uh-oh, liberal ideas coming, right? Got to stamp those down. So the working class began to call for change. They begin to rise up. They begin to say crazy things like, oh, I don't know, maybe we need to elect new people in parliament. Maybe, well, the poor people couldn't vote very much anyway. Maybe we need to change parliament. Maybe parliament needs to be altered. And guys, this caused Lord Liverpool and the British government to get scared. So what did they do? They passed these things called the coercion laws. And one of the things that the coercion laws did was, just like the Germans, guys, it forbade large gatherings. You can't gather in large numbers. Why? Because if people can't gather, they can't conspire and they can't revolt. Guys, very common thing. What do people do to keep in power? Well, they ban things. They ban gatherings, right? Pause if you need to. Well, did it work? No, guys, it's actually going to lead to gatherings and massacres, all right? So, August 16th, 1819, workers are going to gather in the city of Manchester. Now, guys, Manchester is a very important town to the British in the 1800s because it is going to be the center of the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. But it's a big industrial city where lots of workers are, right? So workers gather together in Manchester. Why? Because they're pissed about the Corn Law. They're mad about the sales tax. They're mad about high grain prices. They're hungry. So they gather together to call for change. Well, remember, the government said you can't do that. So what does the local leader of Manchester do? Well, guys, he calls in for a militia to go quiet down this crowd. So you've got an angry group of workers, you've got a scared militia. It's a bad situation, guys. The militia go in, there's a panic, there's terror, and what happens? A fight breaks out. The militia open fire, and 11 people were killed, guys. It's called the Peterloo Massacre. All right? Peterloo Massacre. 11 people were killed. Now, what does Parliament do after this? Well, guys, just like the Germans, they use it as an excuse to pass laws. I wonder what these laws are going to say. Oh, forbid public meetings. I didn't see that one coming. Limit freedom of speech. Didn't see that one coming. Guys, I'm obviously being sarcastic, but that's what they do. They said from now on, no public meetings because of what happened in Manchester. From now on, we're going to censor the press. Press, you can't write things like, we need to reform Parliament. That's dangerous. So they censored the freedom of speech. Another thing they did was they sped up trials for agitators. An agitator is a troublemaker, right? So if somebody's out there causing problems and calling for change, well, you know what? He's going to get a fast trial. We're going to get that guy in prison as quick as we can. Ooh, how about this, guys? Increase taxes for newspapers. We don't want people reading the newspaper because they may get the wrong ideas. So let's jack up the tax on newspapers and get people to buy them less. And guys, here's a big violation of everybody's personal rights. They allow government officials to search homes without a warrant. If a government official thinks that you are gathering and you're not supposed to be gathering, they can come bust down your door without any evidence, guys. Big violation of civil rights. Now, crazy enough, guys, when governments start getting repressive and they start to stamp down people, what do people do? Well, that's when they start getting really crazy ideas. 2 months, guys, after the 6 acts were passed, there was a conspiracy that's called the Cato Street Conspiracy that was uncovered. And apparently, guys, there was this guy that was going to blow up the entire British cabinet. Now, you remember, like, what cabinet? Guys, the cabinet are the government's closest working officials of the leadership of the government. And they were going to wait until they were in there and blow them all up. Crazy, right? Now, it didn't happen because the conspiracy was found out. But boy, did that scare people, and boy, did that give the British government excuse to pass even more laws to say we can't have government meetings. Look, this is what liberals do. They blow up buildings, or they plan to blow up buildings. Anyway, pause if you need to. Okay, let's talk about the French now, guys. Let's move over into France. What's going on in France? Are they going to do the same thing? Well, guys, after Napoleon, Louis the X, 10 plus 5, 15 plus 3, 18, 10, 5, 3, 18, guys. Louis the 18th becomes the king of France. Who's Louis the 18th? Well, guys, he's one of Louis the 16th's brother. And I know you guys are going to say, who's Louis the 17th? Well, guys, Louis the 17th would have been Louis the 16th son. Remember, guys, Louis and Marie Antoinette had children, but Louis the 16th son died in prison. And the people called him Louis the 17th. He died in prison. So the next guy that gets to become king is Louis the 18th, one of Louis the 16th, the guy that got his head cut off, his brother. Anyway, this is Louis the 18th right here. All right. So guys, Louis the 18th is now the new king of France. And kind of like, the guy in Prussia, I forget his name already. Oh, Frederick William III. Kind of like Frederick William III, guys. Louis the 18th had agreed to become a constitutional monarch. Why? Well, guys, he knew the French Revolution had changed France from ever going back to the way it was. So he kind of came to terms with the idea that, look, France has this constitution. They've had it since, a very long time. They've got the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. I can't just throw that away. It's already set in stone pretty much. So what he said was, I will be a constitutional monarch, which means I'll be a king that follows the Constitution. But he created a new constitution that's called the Charter. All right? So he said, yeah, we'll have a constitution, but I'm going to make it. And I'm going to call it the Charter. Well, guys, what was the Charter? Well, guys, the Charter created a new government, a two-house legislature. Now, guys, what's a legislature? It's like a parliament or a Congress. Two houses. Like in the United States, we've got the Senate and the House of Representatives that make up our legislature, which is Congress, right? Well, guys, they're going to have a legislature made up of two houses. And to control how this goes, one of the houses, the upper house, is going to be called the Chamber of Peers. And guess who gets to be in the Chamber of Peers? Anybody the king wants. He's going to nominate his own homies to be in that chamber. Therefore, he can kind of control this lawmaking body. Make sense? Of course it does. He's conservative. Now, he does kind of acknowledge that because the French government has changed, there should be some elections. So the lower house, which is called the Chamber of Deputies, gets to be voted in. So people get to be in there. They get to be elected. But here's the deal. The only people that are allowed to vote are wealthy property owners. So look at this, guys. We're 1815, 1816, and still the people at the bottom of France don't have rights, right? Okay? All right, now, the Charter did guarantee most of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, but it wasn't really big on religious toleration. As a matter of fact, guys, it says Catholicism is the official religion of France from now on. All right. So, guys, it's kind of liberal, I guess, because there is some voting and it does keep the rights of the Declaration of the Rights of Man. But like I said, Catholicism is going to be the official religion of France. And now, guys, here's something that's going to make some people angry. Louis is going to promise to leave property owners alone. Now, you might be like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, guys, here's the deal. Do you remember during the French Revolution how the bourgeoisie and all these people started taking the property of the Catholic Church and wealthy nobles? They burned people's houses and all that stuff, right? Well, guys, a whole bunch of nobles, they were called émigrés, they moved away to other countries because they were scared they were going to get killed, right? So all their land got confiscated. So in order to make people happy, Louis XVIII said, I will not make you give back the land to the nobles. Now, guys, we're going to end the notes right here because I don't want to run over time because I respect your time. But, guys, when he says he's not going to force them to give the land back to nobles, that's going to piss the nobles off. All right, guys? So we're going to hold the notes right here and we're going to pick up tomorrow. Guys, have a good night.